Parachuting Hamsters and Andy Russell, Chapter 6. Remember in Chapter 5, they went down to check on the hamsters, and he tried to pretend like he was one of the hamsters talking, and he did like ventriloquism. And Tamika said he was nuts. And they said they thought that they were too squished together. And Tamika said that he couldn't take them home because he already had a lot of pets. And then at the very end, they were going back to the apartment, and Tamika's uncle is there, so they're going to go out to dinner. Chapter 6, Watch Out! It was a long cab ride to the restaurant, past lots of pizza, hamburger, and taco places. Look at all these great places we're passing, Andy said. How about having pizza instead of French food? Oh, let me move over a little bit. You'll like French food, Uncle Terrence told Andy. I don't think so, Andy thought. When they arrived at the French restaurant, a tall man wearing a tuxedo greeted them at the entrance. Good evening, Madame and Monsieur Taylor, the man said, and bowed slightly. It's so good to see you again. Good evening, Pierre, Aunt Mandy replied. Pierre led Aunt Mandy, Uncle Terrence, Andy, and Tamika through the dark, crowded restaurant to a small round table in the corner. 2 candles flickered from the middle of the table. Pierre raised his hand, and a short, fat man in a very tight tuxedo appeared carrying menus. The man's straight black hair seemed to be pasted to his head. He looks like a penguin, a big menu-carrying penguin, Andy thought, but he didn't say it. The man looked at Aunt Mandy and Uncle Terrence, and then up at the ceiling. Good evening. I am Jacques, he said. I will be your waiter. Andy looked up at the ceiling, too, to see who Jacques was talking to, but all he saw there were some shadows made by the candle's flickering flames. Jacques gave everyone at the table a menu, stepped back and clasped his hands together, held them in front of his belly, and looked up again. As long as he's looking up there, Andy thought, I'll give him something fun to see. Andy linked his 2 thumbs, stretched out his fingers, and waved them in front of the candles. He was making a shadow puppet of a bird. He looked up again. The flickering candlelight made it seem like a bird was flying. Andy looked at Jacques. The waiter's bored expression hadn't changed. Andy made a shadow puppet of a ferocious wolf, but Jacques pretended not to notice. Now what could he be looking at up there, Andy wondered. He leaned back and tried to get a better look at the ceiling, but he still didn't see anything. Andy stood on his chair to get a closer look. What are you doing? Tamika whispered. Andy, please get down, Aunt Mandy told him. I was just trying to see what Jacques was looking at, Andy explained as he sat in his seat again. Jacques said. Yourself, Andy thought. He took the twisted cloth napkin from his glass and spread it across his lap. He carefully moved his chair under the table and then looked at his menu. The menu was coated in plastic. Andy looked at all 6 pages. Hey, I thought this was a French restaurant, Andy complained to Jacques. You don't have any French fries. Still gazing at the ceiling, Jacques said slowly, we have potatoes, of course, but not fried. We have purée de pommes de terre, pommes de terre d'Afour, and galettes de pommes de terre. You have what? Andy asked. Mashed potatoes, baked potatoes, and potato pancakes, Uncle Terrence explained. Okay, Andy said. Please give me potato pancakes. That's a breakfast food, Tamika said. Aunt Mandy said, Tamika's right. Why don't you choose something else? Andy told them, but I like pancakes. Jacques waited. When Andy didn't change his order, Jacques said, galettes, and wrote that on the pad. And could I please have applesauce or syrup to put on top of those gal things? Andy asked. Jacques looked down at Andy disapprovingly. Then he wrote something on his pad. I hope you put down applesauce or syrup, Andy said. We have caramel applesauce, Jacques mumbled, still looking down at his pad. Aunt Mandy and Uncle Terrence and Tamika each ordered poulet au poivre vert. Very good, Jacques said, and wrote their orders on his pad. Then, with his head up and his eyes still directed at the ceiling, he walked toward the 2 doors that led to the kitchen. In this dark place, he should look where he's going, Andy said. He really should. When Jacques returned, a helper stood by him with a basket of twisted rolls and a dish of butter. Andy took a hot roll and cut and buttered it, and then bit into it. Hey, this is good, he said. Jacques bowed slightly. With his hands clasped in front of him, he told Andy, "I think you'll find everything here is quite good." Later, when Jacques brought out the dinners, he carefully placed the plates in front of Uncle Terence, Aunt Mandy, Tamika, and Andy. "Bon appetit," he said, as he rotated the plates slightly so they would look just right in front of each diner. "Proper etiquette," Andy told himself as he reached for his fork. "I must use proper etiquette." He watched Aunt Mandy and did just what she did. He tapped his lips with the edge of his napkin after each forkful of pancake and applesauce. He put his fork down while he swallowed, and he rested after each bite. When he was thirsty, he only took small sips of water. Now I know why Aunt Mandy was in such a hurry, Andy thought. She wanted to get started with dinner because it takes so long to eat and drink with polite nibble and sip way. When he had finished his pancakes, Andy told Aunt Mandy and Uncle Terence, "Thanks for the food. It was really good, especially the applesauce." "Yes," Tamika said, "my dinner was good too." Aunt Mandy patted her lips with the edge of her napkin and said, "You are both very welcome." Uncle Terence smiled and told Andy and Tamika, "Now comes the best part of the meal, the dessert. And I know just what we'll have." He signaled to Jacques and told him, "We'll all have mousse au chocolat meringue." "Mousse?" Andy exclaimed. Mouse!" Andy exclaimed. "I don't eat mouse." "No," Tamika told him. "It's moose, not mouse." "And I don't eat moose either. I don't eat animals. Why can't I have a real dessert like cake or ice cream or pudding?" "Mousse de chocolat de meringue is pudding," Uncle Terence explained. "It's rich chocolate pudding, layered with baked egg whites that have been sweetened and whipped. It's delicious." "Oh," Andy said, "it's just that I like to know what I'm eating before I eat it." "That's true," Aunt Mandy told Uncle Terence. "He does like to know what he's eating." "Thank you," Jacques said. He looked up, turned, and went into the kitchen. "There he goes again," Andy thought, looking at the ceiling. "He's a real up-looker. Well, one day he'll step in some nasty stuff and learn to look where he's going." Just then, a woman at the next table coughed. "Oh my," she said, and coughed again, this time really loudly. Andy turned and looked at her. She was an old woman with lots of curly white hair. A wooden cane was hooked on the back of her chair. An old man was sitting with her. "Drink something," the old man advised the woman. She took a big gulp of water, but it didn't help. While she was drinking, she coughed again, and water sprayed across the table. The woman's face became very red. The man quickly got up and gently patted her on the back. When he did that, he accidentally knocked the cane to the floor. "Look," Aunt Mandy said, "here comes our desserts." Jacques was walking toward them, looking up while holding the tray above his head with one hand. Andy couldn't see what was on the tray. The old woman coughed again, and Andy watched as the old man patted her back again, a little harder this time. She drank some more water. Then Andy looked at Jacques. The waiter was close now, just by the table. "Watch out, Jacques!" Andy warned. "Watch out!" The old man and the woman turned. The woman coughed and sprayed more water, this time onto Jacques. Jacques looked at the old woman, at Andy, and at the floor, but he looked too late. He stepped onto the woman's cane. The cane flew up, and Jacques fell to the floor. Here's a picture. What a mess it's gonna be, huh? The tray flipped over and crashed down on his pasted down hair. Chocolate pudding and meringue splattered onto his hair, face, and tuxedo jacket. The old woman told Jacques, "Oh, I'm so sorry about the water, and I'm sorry about the cane," the old man said as he picked it up and again hung it from the back of the chair. "I'm terribly sorry." "It's not your fault," Jacques declared, pointing a pudding-coated finger at Andy. "It's his fault. Children don't belong in restaurants." "It's not my fault," Andy said. "It's your fault. You shouldn't be looking at the ceiling all the time. You should look where you're going." Jacques shook his fist at Andy and declared, "And you shouldn't talk back to adults." "Andy is right," Aunt Mandy said. "Please don't yell at him again." Jacques tried to get up, but he slipped on some pudding. Pierre hurried from the front of the dining room to Jacques, reached down and helped him up. Jacques' helper appeared with a mop and began to clean the floor. Jacques pointed at Andy and told Pierre, "He shouted and scared me. That's why I fell." "No, that's not what happened," Aunt Mandy said. "Andy has been a perfect gentleman. You didn't look where you were going. Andy tried to warn you before you tripped on the cane. Jacques looked at Aunt Mandy and Uncle Terence. Then he picked up the tray and the dishes and carried them into the kitchen. I'm terribly sorry, Pierre said. I hope none of you had your clothes soiled. Aunt Mandy and Uncle Terence checked. Their clothes were clean. Tamika's clothes were clean, too. Andy's weren't. Some pudding had splattered onto the bottom of his pants leg, but he didn't tell anyone. I'll bring you fresh mousse, Pierre said, and an assortment of cakes and pastries with my compliments. When Pierre walked off toward the kitchen doors, Uncle Terence leaned forward and whispered. Jacques didn't look happy. Yeah, Andy said, but when he was on the floor, he looked funny, like a penguin with a potty accident. Uncle Terence laughed. Andy thought for a moment. Then he said, oops, I met a penguin with a pudding accident, not a potty accident. Aunt Mandy patted Andy's hand and told him, we know what you meant. Pierre set cups of mousse and meringue in front of Andy, Tamika, Aunt Mandy, and Uncle Terence, and he put a large tray of pastries and cakes covered with icing and filled with jelly and cream in the middle of the table. Andy looked at the dish of chocolate mousse in front of him and at the tray of cakes and pastries. He didn't know what to eat first. Then he noticed a large round cake covered with chocolate icing and decorated with a pink icing face that seemed to be smiling up at him. Andy quickly reached across the table. He got some mousse on his shirt sleeve as he took the smiling cake. Andy bit into the cake and pink cream squirted out. Oops, he said, and quickly scooped up the cream with his spoon. Andy got icing and cream on his hands, chin, and shirt, but he was too busy to wipe it off. Next, he ate a square of 5-layer multicolored cake, and some jelly from between the layers oozed onto his shirt. Andy then ate a large heart-shaped cookie covered with powdered sugar. He got sugar all over his hands and pants. Andy looked down at his pants and then up at Aunt Mandy, Uncle Terence, and Tamika. They were all looking at him. Tamika laughed and told Andy, you look like someone who had an accident too, a jelly, sugar, and icing accident. Andy brushed off his pants. He wiped his lips, chin, and hands with his napkin. Then he took a big spoonful of chocolate mousse and meringue. Uncle Terence was right, Andy thought. It is delicious. Andy and Tamika finished their chocolate mousse and every cake and pastry on the dessert tray. When Andy got up from the table, he felt full like a balloon about to pop. On their way out of the restaurant, Aunt Mandy and Uncle Terence thanked Pierre. Yeah, Andy added, thanks a lot for the great pancakes and desserts. Thanks a million. They rode by taxi back to the apartment building. It was dark now, but Andy noticed that in the city at night there were still lots of lights on and a lot of people outside on the sidewalks and in cars. Once they were inside the lobby, Aunt Mandy pressed the button to call the elevator. Andy looked up. A light above the elevator showed that it was on the 20th floor. They waited. When the elevator came down and the doors opened, Aunt Mandy pressed 18. Oh my, she said, and looked at her finger. This is greasy. She held it in front of her nose. It smells like butter. Someone got butter on the elevator button. Aunt Mandy took a tissue from her purse and wiped her finger. Uncle Terence looked at the control panel and said, someone spread butter on all the buttons. Parachuting hamsters and buttered elevator buttons, Andy thought. Probably the same person did both. I've got to add this to my list of clues. What a greasy mess, Aunt Mandy said as she took another tissue from her purse. This is an interesting building, Andy said. Maybe tomorrow someone will butter the lobby floor and people will slide out of the building. This is a good building, Aunt Mandy told him. There are just strange things going on here. There sure are, Andy thought. I wonder what will happen here tomorrow. Dun, dun, dun.